today. Okay, so what I wanted us to do first is you guys see if you can tell me what the Electoral College is all about. Does anybody have any idea? It does. It gives the smaller states more of a part in choosing our president. But can you give me just a definition, just a general definition as to what the Electoral College is, or what does it do?
Well, it's like, I mean, the representatives of each state vote, like they cast votes.
Okay, you're close. First of all, the main thing, and you can write this on that paper I've given you. If you don't have paper, you might want to write kind of small, because you have a map on one side and the information on the front that has the, let me show it to whoever Jacob is watching at home. That's something you're going to be using tomorrow, the grid on the front side. But anyway, the Electoral College is the method by which we choose our president. That's basically the definition. This is the way in which we do it. Hope we can get that on there. Okay. And a lot of people disagree with it. A lot of people think it's not a good idea. I was watching a special thing on it the other day, and it said, that most democracies in the world, they base their elections on what the popular vote is. Now, I'm not sure if you know what the popular vote refers to. Anybody have an idea?
It's like the people who go out and vote.
Yeah, it's the actual counting. Let's say all of you guys, let's say all 6 of you voted, okay? And say you all voted for me to be president. Thank you very much. I will take the job. No, I probably wouldn't want it. But, okay, so you all voted for me. So the popular count for my election would be 6, okay? But now, if the 11th grade, if your Electoral College votes was counted as, let's say your number was 2. Okay, so the popular vote then would be 6, and my Electoral College vote would be 2, because the majority of you voted for me. Even if the ones that aren't here, even if they voted, for somebody else, then they basically wouldn't count, because this would be the biggest number would be you guys. In America, we have the popular vote, which is the actual head count of how everybody votes. The number of people that vote for a particular candidate. In our situation, if we were using the little example I gave you, it would be 6, right? Okay, of course in America it's going to be millions upon millions of people that have voted. Whenever you see the word popular and you're talking about government, you're not talking about the one that's the most liked. You're talking about just substitute the word people in there. Okay? So popular vote is the number of people that vote. But the real vote that counts is whoever wins the number of states. Because each state is worth a certain number of points. And the points, let's see, I'm going to say the state vote, which is the Electoral College vote. The state vote is the Electoral College vote. And so if 1,000 people in West Virginia vote tomorrow for Joe Biden, And if 1,100 people tomorrow vote for Donald Trump, then even though he just won by 100 popular head count, he would still get all of West Virginia's points. And that is really what determines the presidency. I'm not explaining this very well. Let's back up just a little bit and consider what each one of the states are worth. Look at that paper I gave you. The paper that has it, that looks like this, that has the grid. Okay, this shows the amount of points, and again, I'm trying to give it like a game analogy, okay? If it was like volleyball, you have to win how many points to win volleyball? 25, is it, in a game? Okay, the president, in order to win, and this you need to write on this paper. I meant to put it on here and I forgot. But the president needs to get 270. 270 is the magic number. And he gets that, or she gets that. Of course, this year it's two men running. Last time, in 2016, it was a man and a woman, of course, running, Trump and Clinton. But he gets those points for that state based on how the people of that state voted. And the majority of the people in that state, if they voted for one candidate over another, then that candidate gets all, except for 2 states, and we'll look at that a little bit more later on. But that, for the most part, then that candidate gets all of the Electoral College points for that state. How much is West Virginia worth? Look on the little grid. 5. Okay, we're only worth 5 points. And of course, if they've got to reach 270, if you were running for president, then which states would you probably try to go to?
North Dakota.
North Dakota? Only has 3. You'd go to the bigger ones, right? You'd want to hit California, you'd want Texas, you want New York, you want Pennsylvania, you want Florida. Those are the big number states. So, and of course, for a presidential candidate, they're not going to go to states that they're pretty much guaranteed they're going to win that state. For instance, the states that they're almost guaranteed they're going to win are referred to as safe states. They consider, for instance, California is considered a safe state for the Democrats. It's almost a given. President Trump is not going to campaign or hasn't campaigned in California because he knows there's no chance that he's going to win California. I think the only Republican that got California in recent history is Ronald Reagan. And that was because he had been governor of California. Okay? So we're talking a little bit about the Electoral College because tomorrow is the election, all right? And tomorrow night, your assignment is going to be that I want you, now I don't expect you to stay up all night because it may be an all-nighter. I kind of wish we had Wednesday off too because I fully expect most of us are not going to get a lot of sleep tomorrow night because we're going to be watching to see who's going to be our next president. But anyway, tomorrow I'd like for you to watch a little bit of it on TV. I mean, I'm assuming that you're a little interested in who wins. Hopefully. Okay. So watch a little bit of it, and as they call certain states for a particular candidate, I want you to mark it on your paper. And I've given you the number that the Electoral College points are worth for each one of those states. And well, anyway, just kind of keep up with this. And then that is going to be your assignment for tomorrow. Actually, your assignment that you'll do tomorrow won't happen until tomorrow night. You'll have to stay up a little bit tomorrow night and do a little bit of work on this. So anyway, but I want to get back to what the Electoral College really is all about. Yeah, go ahead.
Since we might not be able to like get all of these by the time we go to bed tomorrow night, do you expect us to have?
No, I don't. If I can just see that they'll give us the East Coast first because the East Coast polls will close before the West Coast polls close. And so they'll start making projections. They probably won't even start till about 9 o'clock. because they used to, they being the media used to start giving us reports by 6 or 7 o'clock as to who they thought was going to win Virginia and Massachusetts and all the East Coast states. But that started to have an influence on the western states because of the time difference. The western states polls close like 3 or 4 hours after the East Coast polls close. And so if there was a candidate that was running away with it in the East, some of the people in the West might say, well, there's no point in me even going to vote because the other guy's already got it, or the vice versa. They might say, well, my guy's doing so good on the East Coast, I'm not even going to go vote because he's going to win. And so that was actually having an influence on the turnout, people going to vote. And sad to say, and this is something I want to challenge you with, most of the eligible voters in America don't vote. Now that's probably going to be different this election. I think a lot of people on both sides are really fired up to go out and vote. So I think you're going to see a very heavy populated vote turnout tomorrow. But normally in elections, I think American people have become so disgruntled and so dissatisfied, and they have such a feeling of, I can't change it, what's my one vote count, that they've kind of given up. So normally, sad to say, less than 50% of those that are eligible to vote usually go out and vote. And that's sad, because that means that less than half of the percentage of people that could be voting are making a decision on what all of us have to live with. So it's very important when you guys get older, and of course it's too late to register now. If your parents aren't registered, if your grandparents aren't registered, they can't get registered today because the election is tomorrow. In some states they can, and in some states I think they can go and register and vote at the same moment in time. But they don't let you do that in West Virginia, so you can't do that. But when you guys get old enough, which the next presidential election, all of you will be old enough to vote in. And I just want to encourage you to take part. It's very important that you do take part in this, because this is what decides who is going to be in charge of our government. And of course, what is our government supposed to do? In your own mind, what do you think government is supposed to be to the rest of the people? I pulled up some Bible verses that have to do with government. And I don't know that we have time to really get into all of these, but I was actually going to have some of you read these. But if you will look up different verses in the Bible on government, it basically says that government is supposed to be, let's see, that's what we're supposed to do. Government is supposed to basically protect us. Protect us from looters and rioters and murderers in the street. They're supposed to, they refer to that as a negative concept of government, but they're not supposed to meddle in our affairs unless there's somebody that's doing wrong. The Bible specifically says that it's the government's responsibility to protect its legal citizens and its citizens that are doing the right thing. If we're living in the country and we're not breaking the law, it's the government's responsibility to protect us from enemies, foreign and domestic. If there's American citizens that are rioting and looting and shooting and killing, then it's the government's responsibility to stop that. If we have an invasion from another country, either militarily or just people that are invading our country illegally, it's the government's job to stop that. That is basically what it says biblically. And what are we supposed to do with the law? Here's a good example. 1 Peter 2. It says, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme or unto governors, as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of them that do well. So the government is supposed to reward those that do a good job and discipline those that don't, those that would cause harm. I mean, I have all kinds of verses here on it. Romans 13. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. We are supposed to pay diligence to, allegiance to those in authority over us. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. Meaning that the authorities over you will praise you when you do good and punish you when you do evil. And according to the Bible, I mean, we're not supposed to overthrow the government, but we are supposed to be subject to their laws, so that we live peaceable lives. But now, if the government comes up with a law, like take Daniel, for example. Daniel in the Old Testament, what was the law that he deliberately broke intentionally? He wasn't supposed to pray. He wasn't supposed to ask anything of anyone except of the king. And because he always prayed, he just didn't stop his practice of praying. He didn't hide it. He continued on serving the Lord. What about, and I've always thought of this, what about the midwives? You know, when Moses was born, there was a rule that the midwives that helped to deliver the babies, what were they supposed to do? If a baby boy was born, they were supposed to drown it. Remember? And but the midwives didn't do it. They didn't follow the rules because they knew that was murder. That was taking somebody else's life. They knew that was wrong. Now, they also lied to the leaders and said the reason why we didn't do it was because the Jewish women are full of energy and they give birth before we can even get there, and so the babies are already born alive. But anyway, there are times in the Old Testament and the New Testament when people did not necessarily obey everything that Caesar said to do, but that was only when it was in contradiction with what the scriptures say to do. So that's important for us to remember as Christians. We might not approve of some things the government does, but the way that we change that is like tomorrow. Tomorrow, we organize, we pray, we get out and vote, we get other people to go vote, and we participate in the process. That's very, very, very important to a free society. If we're going to be free, we can't just launch a revolution over everything and anything. But we also have to obey God first, but we have to do what we have to do when it comes to voting. Okay, before I get off on all that, let's go back. The Electoral College then, who are the electors? The electors are just average people. Your neighbor may be an elector in the Electoral College. You don't know. I had a student years ago. Her dad was in the Electoral College. Usually the electors are very aggressively political. Okay, they're involved in their political party, their local political party, very actively involved. So they're going to be a leader in the political party. But they may be just, like I said, it may be your neighbor, maybe one of the electors. Now, what you have to keep in mind is for West Virginia, we have 5 Democrats that are electors, and we have 5 Republicans that are electors. If Donald Trump wins tomorrow in West Virginia, the 5 Democratic electors, they don't do anything. They're done. There's nothing for them to do. The 5 Republican electors have something they must do. Next month, in December, they go and cast their ballot officially for president. And they go to their state capitals. So in West Virginia, the 5 electors from West Virginia, if Donald Trump wins West Virginia, popular vote wise, if Donald Trump wins tomorrow, those 5 Republican electors in December, it's December 13th actually, they will go to Charleston, and it'll be a big pomp and circumstance, I'm sure, show, but they will go and they will vote officially and give Donald Trump 5 Electoral College points. say Biden wins Virginia. He probably will. Not because probably most people in Southern Virginia like Donald Trump, but there's many more people in Northern Virginia, close to DC, and most of those people are going to be Biden supporters. So probably Biden will win Virginia. How many points is Virginia worth? 13. So all 13 of those electors on December 13th will go where? Richmond. They'll go to Richmond to cast their vote. All the ones in California will go to Sacramento. All the ones, in North Carolina will go to Raleigh. Okay, but only the party that wins will be the ones that go to their state capital and cast officially the vote for president. So the 270 is important. Well, let's think about why it's done this way. Like I said, a lot of people want to do away with it. If Biden and the Democrats take the Senate and the House, there's a real good chance that they will work to overthrow or do away with the Electoral College. Now, technically, they're not supposed to do that without adding an amendment to the Constitution. The Constitution says that you cannot change the Constitution without an amendment. And we've had the Electoral College since 1789. Okay, so this is a pretty big deal. It's been around a long time. But the reason why it works is because it gives every state, whether it's a big populated state like California or a little bitty old state like West Virginia or even Alaska. Alaska is our biggest state geographically, but it only has 3. It doesn't even have as many people as West Virginia does. It doesn't have 5 electoral college points. It has 3. So it doesn't matter what size it is. That enables the state to have importance, significance. If it wasn't for that, the big major metropolitan centers, the big urban centers of the United States would make all the decisions for our president. I mean, we might as well not even go vote. West Virginia, most of the Midwest, almost all of the Midwest goes for the Republican candidate. But they don't even need to go, because by the time you count up, well, I use this example. New York City, just New York City, not New York State, but just New York City, is 8 times larger in population than all of West Virginia. So if you think about that and you think about the voters, New York trumps, forgive the pun, but it works, New York will trump West Virginia every time, just New York City. And of course, New York City and all of these major metropolitan centers, Chicago, San Francisco, maybe even some of the big ones in Texas, even like Houston or Austin. But Texas usually goes Republican, but still yet, these big major metropolitan centers, they are usually going to be very liberal and very Democratic. They're going to lean toward the Democratic Party. So, I mean, pretty soon, most of the country would just really give up. We say that only 50% or less than 50% of the eligible voters vote today. It would be so much less than that, there'd be no point in going to vote. You knew that your one vote in West Virginia was going to be X'd out by 8 votes just in New York City. Again, that's not the whole state. And New York State is a good example because they usually always go blue. They usually always go Democratic. But anyway, this is what's coming tomorrow. The polls will open in West Virginia, I know, at 6:30, because I did work the polls for years. And the polls will open at 6:30, and they won't close until 7, or they may have changed to 7:30, but I'm pretty sure it's still just 7. So then they will start making predictions as to who has won. But again, I don't think the media will make many announcements until they feel like the West is almost ready to shut their polls or they have shut them. Now, how do they know? there's two things. If I go vote tomorrow, and of course unless I'm near death, I plan to be there. I did not early vote this time. I have early voted before, but I didn't do it this time. But when I go tomorrow, if I had a Make America Great Again hat and I wore that, that would be illegal. And they would ask me to take it off. They'd say, you gotta take that off, leave it in your car. You cannot have on, if your mom goes or you all go, even though your name is Trump, they probably wouldn't let you come in. I mean, really, there's a reason for that. You're not allowed to campaign or politicize for a candidate at the polling place. You're not allowed to stand outside the door and say, oh, please go in and vote for Joe Biden, or please go in and vote for Donald Trump. That's called electioneering, and they will call the police on you. I mean, I was told as a poll worker, if you have something like that, you are to call. You are to if you need to, get the police if they won't quit or they won't leave, because you're not allowed to do that. But you cannot try to influence somebody as they're getting ready to vote. But you can ask them how they voted when they leave. And that's referred to as an exit poll, because they're exiting. Makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, so as somebody is leaving the building, you can stop, and you may even run into one. I don't know, none of y'all will be voting tomorrow though, will you? No. Well, if you go with your parents, your polling place is here. I mean, your mom and dad's, I'm sure, is right here. Mine is too. If you go with your folks, you may see somebody out there that, hey, can I ask you a few questions? Sometimes people will answer, sometimes they won't. But that is how they determine, or that's how they predict that certain places have gone for certain candidates, even before the official tallies are in. They can predict that. We predict that with 2% of the votes being counted, that West Virginia is going for Donald Trump. That's going to be pretty easy fix there. And it's really ironic, because 15, 20 years ago, West Virginia was a Democratic state, period, the end. Satan himself could have been running as president on the Democratic ticket 20 years ago, and West Virginians would have voted for him, because West Virginians were Democrat do or die. It was Democratic Party was God, and the Republican Party was Satan. And so if you wanted to vote, you better vote blue. Now it's changed. It's really flipped in the last 20 years. And it may change again. We have two political parties in this country that are the major parties, but we have all kinds of parties in America. And just because we have these two, they could change. As a matter of fact, and this will be really important for our study of government next year, so pay attention to this, okay? If the Democrats don't do well tomorrow across the country, if they don't do well, then obviously they're not getting their message out to the people, or the people is rejecting the message they're hearing. So the Democrats very likely could really change after next year. As a matter of fact, a big part of the Democrats now have adopted the progressive socialist platform. And so they may actually splinter. They call them splinter parties, because they break away from each other. And it is possible, just because we have two major parties, and we have had for a long time, doesn't mean that they won't change. We might end up with a more socialist party and a Republican Party, or even a Democratic Party and a Socialist Party. Personally, I think that the Democrats have allowed their extreme left wing to kind of kidnap their party and make changes to it that the majority of Americans don't approve of. But I might be wrong. Tomorrow we might see it might be a blue wave. And why do I say blue and red? Why do we call it that way?
Because the Republicans are represented by red and the Democrats are represented
Right. If you look at my little board up here, of course the mascot, if you will, for the Democrats and Republicans, the Democrats are a donkey and the Republicans are an elephant. And usually Republicans designate themselves with the color red and Democrats designate themselves with the color blue. So tomorrow night while you're watching, whatever news channel you want to watch, I mean, you know, whichever one you want to, you might even want to flip around, watch one a little while, watch another one a little while, and get the flavor as to how they differ, how the news broadcasters, you know, they differ in the way they present the information. But you can almost guarantee that they'll have a big map of the United States up and running. And of course, most of them have touch boards now where they'll touch it and it'll turn whatever color it is they're wanting it to turn. But as they start to make projections as to who has won, you know, they'll hit the state and it'll go red, or they'll hit the state and it'll turn blue. And then they'll start a column, just like I've given you there, of counting up the Electoral College points. Now, the first one to get to 270 is the only one that gets to 270, because 270 is one more than half. And so that will be the next president. What is the real, some people are saying that we may not know tomorrow who wins, and we may not, which is unusual because it started back in 2000, I guess, when George W. Bush was running against Al Gore. I remember I told everybody, I said, you know, and we had school that day. We didn't have election day off. I said, by tonight we'll know who our next president is. Oh, boy, that was a lie, because we didn't know until December who our president was going to be. And that was all because it was getting close to the Electoral College count. And that's another thing. That's a thing to really watch that might make this election extremely interesting. If nobody gets to 270, if they cannot determine that there's been a clear-cut 270 winner by the time the electors meet in December. That is what date? December 13th. It's a Monday. The Constitution says it's the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December. Go figure. I mean, I don't know, but anyway. So if they haven't called it, if they really don't know who's president by then it has to go to the House of Representatives, and they get to pick who's president. They get to vote on it. Now, every state, I think, counts as one vote in that, but still yet, they would have to pick, you know, from the top three contenders, which basically they'd have to pick between Trump or Biden, and right now, who dominates the House of Representatives? What party? The Democrats. So the odds are pretty good that they're not going to pick the Republican candidate. They would pick the Democratic candidate. But anyway, let's pray that doesn't happen. And let's also pray that, you know, people don't go nuts if their side doesn't win. I mean, that's why I wanted to point out, God is the one, the verses that we looked at. God is the one who establishes kings, and he establishes those in charge. He just decides the authorities over us. That's why we need to pray for tomorrow that his will be done. We'll accept it. We'll move on one way or the other. The world will keep turning. The Lord's will be done, and maybe it just be closer to his kingdom coming. But we need to pray about it and pray that people won't go nuts one way or the other. If they lose, did you hear what they said Walmart was going to do at first? Now they've changed their mind. Go ahead.
You can continue. I just had a question.
Okay. Well, they said over the weekend that Walmart was pulling out all their guns and their ammo from off their sales floor in case there was rioting and people broke into Walmart and stole those guns. Well, I mean, you know, for violence. Okay, well, now they've changed that and they're not doing that. I guess they got too much pressure from probably the NRA and other things. But the thing of it is, are people going to go nuts and start looting and burning and destroying? And if they do, are we going to have any government officials with enough backbone to step up there and protect us? Remember, that's what government's supposed to do. Government's supposed to protect us. They're supposed to keep law and order. That's their main thing. Their main thing is not to provide us with health care and to provide us with free tuition to college and you know, to give us roses and flowers and, you know, and just make life just wonderful for all of us at somebody else's expense, because that's really what that is. Again, nothing is free. If your government is promising you free stuff, then they're getting that from somewhere, and it isn't out of their pockets. They're usually taxing people enormous amounts of money. And so, you know, again, any government big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take away everything you own. And that's something that scares me plumb slam to death. Because we, you know, basically government should let us alone. Let us operate ourselves. But then that puts responsibility on us to do right. To help people that are out and about, you know, people that are on welfare now. It used to be that charities and churches and people took care of people like that they stepped up, that they helped others, and not the government, but that, you know, Christians that really believe that they ought to do what God wants them to do. I mean, we have to have a little bit of both of that, I guess, anymore. But, okay, what was your question?
How is it that, like, you can, like, sometimes that you can't have a clear winner in the electoral college? Like, if it's one more than half. then,
Right.
Like, how does that
They
happen?
can't decide on the voting, for one thing. Okay, for instance, some states have said that, this blows my mind, because I'm thinking, you know, we've kind of like known this election was coming for quite a long time now. And so if somebody has not turned in their ballot, if they had a mail-in ballot and they're turning it in late, well then pooey on them, it shouldn't be able to count. But some states have said that they're going to count their mail-in ballots up to 3 or 4 days after the election. So if it's close, if you got a major, what they call a swing state, like Pennsylvania or Florida or any of those that are big numbers that could go either way, if you've got that problem and they're still counting absentee ballots or mail-in ballots, then, you know, there's going to be lawsuits. There's going to be people saying you shouldn't be able to count it. The Constitution says, you know, that you have the general election day on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, and, you know, it should be that way. And they've already had all kinds of lawsuits over this. But see, that was the problem in 2000. With Florida couldn't decide which way it was going to go. And basically, I think they knew that it was going toward Bush, but they didn't want it to go towards Bush. So they were trying to do everything they could possibly think of to not let it go toward Bush. And so they kept going back in and counting and recounting and counting again, and actually taking out the little cards that were the punch-through cards. And when the little flap, you know, when you punch through something and the little perforated chad, we didn't know what that name, or I didn't know what that name was before, but when that little chad does not get punched all the way through and it's a hanging chad, it's just still attached to the paper, then they would try to guess, well, did the person really mean to vote for this person and accidentally punch this one too? So you're trying to read what somebody intended to do, because maybe 2 had been started to be punched through and one was through a little bit more than the other one. And so they were literally counting them by hand. They were just trying to do everything they could to keep Bush from winning, because if he won Florida, whoever won Florida won, and they could not decide. And of course that went to the Supreme Court. And finally, because it was getting close to the Electoral College meeting, Gore gave up. Because at that time, the House of Representatives was led by Republicans. And so it would have gone for Bush anyway. But see, it's not that way this time. And so who knows? We'll just have to see. We'll have to pray and trust the Lord. Could go either way. But again, who establishes thrones and kingdoms, and who puts those people on the throne and in power? God does. and all things work together for good for those that love the Lord and seek His purpose. Okay, so that's basically your assignment. Bring that back in Wednesday, and we'll kind of talk about things then, okay?